Welcome to the brownstone, where logic triumphs and tempers occasionally flare. Tell us where in the world you're listening. Wolfe may never leave home, but his stories travel well. Subscribe for more mysteries with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the day Fritz walked out. If you ever want to experience what the end of civilization smells like, walk into Nero Wolfe's kitchen at 8:15 in the morning and find it empty. The air had the stillness of a church after the congregation's gone home, except churches don't usually have a coffee pot mocking you from the stove. The pot was there all right, but cold, untouched, and so innocent you could swear it hadn't done anything wrong. The only other thing on the table was a single sheet of paper in Fritz Brenner's meticulous hand. I read it 3 times before admitting it still said the same thing. I must leave. Forgive me. No date, no reason, no forwarding address. Just a farewell from a man who'd cooked for us for 15 years without missing a lunch bell. For Fritz to vanish without warning was like Manhattan forgetting to light up after sundown. I stood there staring at the note, debating whether this was some new branch of modern art or a crime in progress, when I heard the elevator sigh and clank. Wolfe's yellow silk robe appeared first, followed by the rest of him, arranged with the same gravity you might expect of the British Museum on a humid day. "Good morning, sir," I said, though it wasn't. "Breakfast is cold, in theory." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted a 1/4 inch. "Fritz overslept." "That's the punchline. Fritz isn't here to oversleep." I handed him the note. He left a sonnet on stationery and disappeared before the coffee got its license renewed. Wolfe took the page, adjusted his spectacles and read, then read again, lips tightening until they looked like a clamp on a jar of mustard. "Pfui," he said softly, not as an expletive but a diagnosis. "He has not walked out, Archie," he murmured finally. "He has been driven out." That was Wolfe's way of saying something was rotten beyond the kitchen door. I'd seen him angry before, usually when I mixed metaphors near the orchids, but this was different. His voice had the coolness of granite thinking about thunder. I trailed him back to the office. The morning light came in lazy stripes through the Venetian blinds, glancing off the globe and the unread mail on his desk. I sat where I usually do, front row seat to genius, while Wolfe lowered himself into the red leather chair like a battleship easing into harbour. He studied the note again. "Paper of high quality," he said. "Embossed crest. A griffin rampant on a field of utensils. Identify it." "Kitchen fraternity," I suggested. "Maybe the Knights of the Golden Spatula." "Don't be absurd," he snapped. "You'll find the magnifying lens in the drawer." I fetched it. Wolfe held the note under the light, fingers precise as a jeweller's. "The Cordon Doré Club," he declared after a moment. "Midtown, private, French charter, limited to 20 chefs and their patrons. Fritz was invited once but declined. He detests culinary vanity." "Maybe someone made him an offer he couldn't refuse," I said, though why he'd run off before breakfast beats me. "Because he was coerced," Wolfe said, voice dropping. "No man abandons his duty here of his own volition." That one had weight. Wolfe's idea of duty ranked somewhere between the Constitution and his beer schedule. I went to the phone. "I'll call the club, see if Fritz checked in for a soufflé rehearsal." "No," Wolfe's eyes flashed. "You will not announce our perplexity to strangers. We will ascertain quietly." "Meaning me in a hat, chasing phantoms while you commune with upholstery." "That will suffice," he said. "But first, Theodore." I rang the bell cord. Theodore Horstman arrived from the plant rooms smelling faintly of moss and disapproval. He rarely descended from his orchid kingdom before noon. "Fritz has disappeared," Wolfe said curtly. "You will manage luncheon. Something edible but unambitious. I shall not eat breakfast." Theodore blinked. "Not eat?" I said not. If Wolfe refused a meal, you could expect the Hudson to flow backward next. Theodore retreated, dazed. I leaned against the desk. "So what's the move, boss? We give him 12 hours, then call missing persons?" "You will locate Mr. Panzer," Wolfe ordered, "at his convenience this morning." "Saul's always convenient, for a fee." "I shall pay it." He pressed his fingers together. "Meanwhile you may visit the Cordon Doré, discreetly. Do not invoke my name." I grinned. I never use your name unless I'm trying to get out of a speeding ticket. Wolfe glared. Your levity is misplaced. Maybe, I said, pocketing the note. But without Fritz, somebody has to keep the atmosphere breathable. I headed toward the door, then paused. You want me to eat something before I go? Just to show solidarity? Eat what you please, he said. I shall subsist on coffee and inference. That sounded like trouble's recipe. By the time I hit West 35th Street, the city had finished yawning and was already arguing. The October air had the sting of leftover rain, and the traffic was practicing for Armageddon. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of the Cordon Doré Club, which he misheard as Golden Door, a confusion I didn't correct. No sense giving him something French to think about before breakfast. The club turned out to be one of those discreet midtown brownstones pretending to be anonymous. The brass plate by the door was small enough to make you feel unworthy for noticing it. Inside, the air smelled of money that had recently dined well. A receptionist with the posture of a fencing instructor looked me over. Members only, sir. I'm not here for the soup course, I said. I'm looking for Fritz Brenner. Mr. Brenner resigned his membership yesterday, she said without blinking. That's quick work. I didn't even know he joined. She offered the faint smile used by people paid not to know things. He was a guest of Chef Anton Kreisel. That name tickled memory. Kreisel, the one who made the ambassador's banquet famous for its sauce that ate like velvet. Her smile thinned. Chef Kreisel is occupied. I'll bet, I said. Tell him an admirer dropped by. Archie Goodwin. She didn't write it down, which meant it was filed under forgettable. I gave the lobby a last look. Too much marble, too little humanity, and stepped back into the grey light. It wasn't much, but it was something. Fritz, who wouldn't join a club if it served truffles in gold bowls, had suddenly become a guest of a famous chef, then walked out on Wolfe the same night. If that didn't smell of coercion, it was at least sautéed in mystery. I phoned Saul Panzer from a corner booth. Saul, got a problem that's half domestic, half lunatic. Fritz Brenner's missing. Impossible, Saul said in his usual monotone. The man's part of the furniture. That's the rumour. Check Midtown, start with the Cordon Doré Club, quietly. Understood, he said, and hung up. Saul's brevity could win wars. I grabbed a cab home. My stomach was starting to mutiny from lack of Fritz's influence, and the prospect of Theodore's unambitious luncheon didn't inspire. When I got back, the brownstone felt larger than usual. Emptier too, like the heart of a man who'd misplaced his chef. Wolfe was at his desk, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. The orchids upstairs were missing his company. It was nearly 11, and he hadn't gone up. That was bad. When Wolfe missed orchid hour, the earth tilted. Well, he said. Fritz was Kreisel's guest at the Cordon Doré, resigned yesterday. Ah, Wolfe opened his eyes. So the lure was professional. Anton Kreisel, a capable cook, an insufferable man. I have tasted his work. And? It lacked conviction. I perched on the arm of a chair. You think Kreisel roped Fritz in for some joint recipe venture and it went sour? Wolfe grimaced. Speculation is permissible but premature. You will compose a memorandum of your visit. Sure, I said, heading for the typewriter. Shall I file it under domestic calamities or hell freezes over? Under current case, Wolfe said, then softer. Archie, he is my friend. That stopped me. Wolfe didn't hand out friendship like coffee refills. I turned. Then we'll get him back. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. See that we do. I was halfway through typing when the doorbell rang. I went to answer. Theodore appeared at the same moment, bearing a tray. Lunch is at 1, he announced as if testifying before Congress. Fine, I said. Maybe Fritz will drop by for dessert. Wolfe's head lifted. Do not be flippant. I'm not. If Fritz cooked it, I'd believe in miracles. Theodore left, wounded. I brought the mail in, a pile of bills, circulars, and a magazine for which Wolfe had never subscribed but always read. He ignored it all, eyes fixed on the note like it was an uncooperative witness. Archie, he said finally, telephone Saul again at 3. I expect results by dinner. Assuming we have dinner. Phooey, he muttered. We shall have truth, if nothing else. That was Wolfe. Others dined on roast duck. He dined on deduction. I set the note on his blotter. You really think he didn't just crack under pressure? Too many soufflés, not enough peace. He gave me a look that could turn milk sour. Fritz Brenner does not crack. He may be broken by others, not by life. The elevator hummed as he rose. I shall attend to my orchids, he said. If any word comes, summon me immediately. Sure thing. The doors closed behind him. I looked around the office, at the books, the globe, the empty chair, and realized the brownstone had never seemed so quiet. The smell of cold coffee drifted in from the kitchen like a ghost of better mornings. I poured myself a cup, cold or not. Somebody had to uphold tradition until the world righted itself, and somewhere out in the city, a Swiss chef who made miracles out of butter was on the run. If that didn't warrant investigation, nothing did. By the time dusk slid down the buildings like a tired cat, I was back outside the Cordon Doré Club, trying to look as if I belonged in a world where even the doorknobs probably had bank accounts. The street smelled of rain and roasted duck, the kind of combination that makes a man wish civilization had stuck with simpler vices. I straightened my tie, blue, not soufflé approved, and walked in. The lobby was hushed, panelled, and expensive enough to make the air feel leased. Behind the front desk stood a maitre d' so thin he could have doubled as a breadstick. His eyes slid over me the way a cook checks for hair in the soup. "Good evening, sir. Reservation?" "Sort of," I said. "I'm looking for a friend. Fritz Brenner." The name got a twitch, like I'd said something unsanitary. "Mr. Brenner is no longer with us." "You mean he's left the premises or joined the Choir Invisible?" He didn't smile. "He resigned his post yesterday morning." That was a neat trick, considering Fritz's resignation letter at home was timed several hours later. "Mind if I look around? I promise not to upset the table settings." "I'm afraid that's impossible, sir." Apparently, the Cordon Doré didn't hand out visitor passes. Before I could decide whether to bribe or charm my way past him, a door to the right swung open and a heavy-set man in a white jacket came out wiping his hands. His face was broad, his moustache combed like a weapon, and his expression said he'd bitten into something sour that fought back. "Chef Kreisel?" I asked. He gave me the up and down. "You are from the newspapers?" The accent was Mittel European, the kind that makes every sentence sound like an accusation. "No, just an admirer of good food and missing friends. Fritz Brenner." Kreisel's lips pressed together until they turned white. "Brenner. Ah. He was, how you say, too proud. A man cannot cook with his conscience sitting on his shoulder. He left. That is all." "Funny, he didn't leave a forwarding address. Or his knives." Kreisel turned away. He had no further use for them. That one landed with a dull thud of finality. I followed him through the swinging door before the maitre d' could object. Inside, the kitchen gleamed like a surgical theatre. Coppers shone, silver burned under the lamps, and a dozen men moved with choreographed precision that would make the army blush. Kreisel led me to a row of lockers against the far wall. One was open, empty except for a folded white apron and a small scrap of paper. He snatched it up, but not before I caught a glimpse of the embossed griffin Wolfe had pointed out earlier. "Club stationery," I said. "Fritz wasn't writing love letters on company time, was he?" "Enough," Kreisel barked. "You have no authority here. Go." I might have, if another voice hadn't entered the scene. "Excuse me," said a woman, calm and efficient. She wore the standard-issue uniform of club secretaries, grey suit, pearls, and the look of someone who files emotions alphabetically. "Chef Kreisel, if you're finished intimidating the guests, I need you to sign for tomorrow's produce." Kreisel grunted and stalked off toward a clipboard. The woman turned to me. "You must be Mr. Goodwin." That caught me off guard. "You read minds?" "Only appointment books. Your office telephoned earlier, Mr. Wolfe's, asking if Mr. Brenner was employed here. The manager told me to expect someone inquisitive." So much for discretion. I leaned against the counter. "Miss?" "Law. Ingrid Law." She gestured toward a quieter corner of the kitchen, away from the hiss of pans. "You're not here for dinner." "Not unless suspicion's on the menu." "Then you may find plenty of it here," she said. "This club serves more secrets than soup." I liked her already. "Start with Fritz. What was he doing here?" She hesitated, checking the doorway before speaking. "He was assisting Chef Kreisel in preparing the Norvonian embassy banquet. There was a misunderstanding about a certain recipe book." Whose misunderstanding? Everyone's. The book belonged to the club, the recipes to a royal household. Someone removed it 2 nights ago. So that was the aroma Wolfe had sniffed out. Scandal flambéed with diplomacy. And Fritz was blamed? He had access and no alibi. He left before the police could be called. Very thoughtful of him, I said. Saves the taxpayers. Miss Law didn't smile. I don't think he was guilty. He was frightened. Of Kreisel? Perhaps, but also of a woman. He met her here that night. That perked my ears. You saw her? Only a glimpse. She wore a dark veil, and he addressed her as Madam. When they left the kitchen, he looked ashamed. I was still digesting that when Kreisel reappeared, signature scrawled, eyes like twin blazes. Out, he barked. Miss Law, attend to your duties. This is a private establishment. Miss Law's mouth tightened. Of course, chef. She slipped away down a corridor, leaving a faint trace of perfume that didn't belong in a kitchen. I followed Kreisel toward the exit. Before I go, just one thing. If you see Fritz again, tell him the eggs are getting cold. He sneered. Eggs? Bah! He is finished. That made 2 of us who didn't believe it. Night had settled over Midtown like a layer of soot by the time I stepped outside. The streetlights blurred in the drizzle. I paused under the awning, flicking open my notebook. So far, Fritz vanished, empty locker, veiled lady, stolen recipe book with diplomatic aftertaste. Not bad for a day's work, even if it didn't come with dinner. I was debating the merits of raiding a nearby automat when a taxi pulled up and a familiar cap leaned out. Saul Panzer. Trust Wolfe to pull strings faster than the subway schedule. Find anything? He asked. Plenty of steam, no pudding. Fritz worked with a big shot who's now treating me like a cockroach in the consommé. Saul nodded. Want me to nose around? Try it, but discreetly. We're guests of honor on nobody's list. He grunted assent and melted back into the night. I headed around the block to the alley behind the club. The kitchen windows glowed high above, spilling rectangles of light onto the wet pavement. A couple of employees slipped out, talking in low voices. One word floated down. Recipe. I eased closer, using the kind of subtlety that had once gotten me mistaken for a mugger. The talk stopped. A door banged. Footsteps receded. Then something metallic clinked near a trash bin. I bent down and found a torn scrap of thick paper, damp but legible. The same griffin crest, and underneath a faint penciled word, Madam L. That sounded less like a cook's note and more like a spy novel. I pocketed it and turned to leave, only to find Miss Law standing 10 feet away under a street lamp, rain glittering on her veil. Following me? I asked. I might ask the same, she said evenly. You shouldn't be here. I'm sentimental about back alleys. She hesitated, glancing toward the club door. If you care about Mr. Brenner, stop asking questions here. Someone is listening. Who? She shook her head. I can't say. Before I could press, the door behind her opened. Kreisel stood framed in light, face darker than ever. Miss Law, he barked, inside, immediately. She flinched and obeyed. Kreisel gave me one look that could freeze grease, then slammed the door. I walked to the curb, lit a cigarette, and watched the smoke vanish in the drizzle. Fritz's world had turned into a stew, ingredients missing, temperature rising, and somebody stirring too hard. Back at the brownstone, the clock in the hall chimed 9 as I let myself in. Wolfe was in the office, reading. The smell of coffee was in the air, which meant Theodore's emergency rations had failed to inspire. Well? He asked without looking up. The cordon doré is a swell joint for people who think calories are vulgar. Fritz was there, worked with a man named Anton Kreisel. Recipe book went missing. There's a woman in a veil, name unknown, and a secretary named Miss Law who talks like she's on the witness stand. Wolfe put down his book. Describe this Miss Law. Efficient, pale, smarter than most recipes. And Kreisel? A bear in a toque. He thinks Fritz's conscience interfered with the soufflés. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. A recipe book of royal origin. A woman who veils her face. A proud man who leaves without explanation. The flavours mingle. They also curdle, I said. Want me to stir further? He opened his eyes. Not tonight. You will dictate a full report. I went to the typewriter, rolled in a sheet and started tapping. The rhythm filled the room. Wolfe sat motionless, fingers steepled, watching me like a cat studying a clock. When I finished, he signed the page with a flourish and locked it in the drawer. "You have eaten?" he asked suddenly. "Coffee counts," he scowled. "It does not. At 1 o'clock tomorrow, luncheon as usual." "With what cook?" "Mr. Horstman will improvise. I shall endure." That was Wolfe's idea of optimism. I got up, stretching. "Anything else before I retire? Maybe bake some cookies?" "Pfui, go. We have entered an unsavory arena. Culinary ambition, aristocratic vanity, and possibly murder." "Murder?" "Perhaps not yet, but the recipe exists." He reached for the bell cord. "Good night, Archie." "Good night, boss. Try not to starve. I can't afford a monument that size." As I climbed the stairs, the last sound from the office was the gentle clink of his beer glass against the coaster. A man toasting absence. Fritz was out there somewhere in a world of gilded kitchens and veiled women. And if I knew Nero Wolfe, tomorrow the city would find out just how far a sedentary genius could reach without leaving his chair. By noon the next day, the brownstone had the atmosphere of a monastery on a hunger strike. The clock ticked too loudly, the elevator cables sighed like lost souls, and the kitchen, normally humming with Fritz's civilized alchemy, stood mute except for the occasional suicidal drip from the faucet. I'd been keeping myself alive on coffee and optimism, and both were running low. At precisely 1 o'clock, the bell cord gave its usual tug from Wolfe's office. That meant lunch hour. Under normal conditions, Fritz would appear with a procession of silver and aroma. Today, Theodore Horstman trudged in from the kitchen, balancing a tray that looked like the ransom payment for good taste: dry toast, plain eggs, and a single glass of milk. Wolfe surveyed it as if Theodore had offered him a loaded mousetrap. "Remove it," he said. Theodore blinked. "Sir, you asked for—" "I said remove it. I shall not eat." He pressed both palms on the desk, the motion of a man declaring war on the stomach. That was my cue. "Hold everything. You skipping lunch is like the city skipping rent. Civilization can't afford it." He turned those brown eyes on me, polished walnut with no warmth. Civilization will endure one man's abstinence. Fritz will not. "Maybe he's on a job," I said. "Cooks do get freelance urges. You taught him to have pride, remember?" Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. Pride, yes. Desertion, never. I let it ride. When Wolfe chose the tone that could sandpaper granite, you didn't argue. You waited until it dulled. Theodore, unsure which deity to obey, retreated with his tray. The scent of warm milk trailed him out like a dying hope. For the next hour, Wolfe sat motionless, fingers steepled, pretending to read a botanical monograph. I typed up my report from yesterday, because somebody had to make noise before the silence cracked the walls. When the phone rang at 2:10, I grabbed it faster than a drowning man spots a rope. "Goodwin speaking." "Tell your boss I'm sending him a food basket," said Inspector Kramer. "Something easy to chew. Crow." His voice carried enough gravel to resurface Fifth Avenue. "Hello, Inspector. If this is about Fritz Brenner's culinary career, you're out of your jurisdiction. Domestic tragedies aren't homicide." "They are now," he said. "Anton Kreisel, the fancy chef at that gold-plated joint you visited, found dead in his own pantry at 11 this morning, knife in the throat." That stopped my breathing long enough for Wolfe to look up. I mouthed Kramer and murder. He extended a hand, and I passed him the receiver. "Mr. Wolfe," Kramer said, "you've got a problem. The murder weapon's a carving knife with initials FB. I don't have to tell you what that spells." "You may spare yourself," Wolfe answered evenly. "Where was the knife kept?" "In Kreisel's kitchen. Every other blade was accounted for. And Brenner's vanished, so don't tell me this is coincidence." Wolfe's tone turned icy. "Inspector, your perspicacity is exceeded only by your haste. Mr. Brenner would no more cut a man's throat than serve a reheated sauce." Kramer snorted. "The DA doesn't season cases with poetry. We found Brenner's locker empty and his apron missing. Looks bad." Archie Goodwin, your loyal employee, chose that moment to contribute. "Inspector, a thought. You ever known Fritz to touch another man's utensils? He won't even borrow a paring knife without confession." "Then somebody framed him," Kramer growled. "Maybe your cook made enemies. Either way, I'm sending Stebbins over to pick up whatever notes or letters he left behind." "Unnecessary," Wolfe said. "You may come yourself if you wish. There are none." "I bet," Kramer said. "Listen, I like that man's strudel as much as anyone, but facts are facts. He's our number one suspect until we find somebody who hated Kreisel more. There will be such a person, Wolfe replied, and I shall find him. Without leaving your chair? As ever. There was a long exhale through the line that might have been smoke or despair. All right, Wolfe, Kramer said finally. But if you're wrong, I'll come back with a warrant and an appetite. He hung up. Wolfe replaced the receiver as though it were fragile evidence, then sat in silence long enough for me to time the clock's ticks. At last he spoke. This city's police suffer from nutritional deficiency. Too much haste, too little digestion. Speaking of digestion, I said, you're on strike. That can't last. He ignored me. Bring me the note again. I fetched Fritz's farewell from the drawer. Wolfe spread it before him, studying the curves of the pen strokes. Observe, Archie. The hand trembles on the final word. Fear. Or bad lighting. Fear, he repeated. Something compelled him. Now blood follows. He rose, a rare event, and crossed to the globe. His thumb spun it lazily. Kreisel's death. What motive? Professional envy? A stolen recipe book? Or politics disguised as pâté? I leaned back. Kramer says it's personal. Maybe Kreisel tried to poach Fritz's skills and got carved for his trouble. Wolfe gave me a look that could sterilize knives. A jest in poor taste. Sorry, my sense of humor's the only thing getting fed around here. He sighed and sank into the chair again. Archie, this establishment must maintain its equilibrium. The absence of Fritz, the intrusion of homicide, chaos. We will restore order. I'm all for that. Where do we start? By facts. Saul Panzer is still in the field? Yep. Tailing the Cordon Doré crowd. Good. Telephone him at 5 and request an update. Until then, silence. That last word was law. Wolfe closed his eyes. I spent the next hour pretending to read Variety while the office filled with the smell of paper and discontent. When the clock struck 4, Theodore reappeared with a small plate of crackers and the cautious air of a man offering peace to a volcano. Dinner, perhaps? He ventured. No, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. Not until Mr. Brenner returns. Theodore looked to me for backup. I shrugged. You heard him? We're on spiritual sustenance. He left muttering something in German that I didn't translate because it probably meant idiots. At 4:30 the phone rang again. I reached it first. Goodwin. A gruff voice. Stebbins. Tell Wolfe Kramer's sending over the official report for his scrapbook. Much obliged, I said. Anything new? Yeah, Kreisel's blood was on the knife, but no prints, except maybe one partial they can't match. Not Fritz's. Too early to tell, but get this. Pantry door was locked from the inside. That gave me pause. Then how'd the killer leave? Good question. When Wolfe answers it, tell him to call me. He hung up. I relayed the news. Wolfe's brows rose a millimetre. Locked room, he said softly. How trite. And yet, he frowned. The pantry latch is spring-loaded. A clever hand could hook it through the serving hatch and pull the door to from outside. It fools the eye, not the fact. Fritz couldn't have done it, not unless he turned into smoke. Precisely. He lifted the bell cord. Beer, Archie. That was progress. Fritz might be gone, but Wolfe refusing beer would have meant Judgment Day. I fetched a bottle from the kitchen, chilled as per canon, and poured it into the glass he preferred. He drank slowly, eyes still fixed on the note. Archie, have you ever noticed the world collapses when I abstain from lunch? Often, I said. But you've still got dinner to miss. He ignored that. This murder threatens the equilibrium of my household. Therefore it is my concern. The police may blunder. We shall deduce. Fine, I said. Except deduction won't fill the pantry. Pfui, we shall fill it with justice. He said it like a man ordering dessert. At 7 that evening, the Gazette hit the stoop. The headline was short and spicy. Chef slain with own knife. Police hunt Fritz Brenner. Lon Cohen owed me one for that placement. I carried the paper in and dropped it on Wolfe's desk. He scanned it, nostrils flaring. So, the press has declared sentence. Excellent. We shall oblige them with correction. Kramer's going to love that, Wolfe snorted. Kramer will survive his embarrassment. Mr. Brenner may not survive false accusation. I took a chair. What's your plan? Hire Saul to find Fritz before the cops do? He nodded. Yes, and you will assist. but no interference with official evidence. We must acquire knowledge, not objects. Understood, I paused. By the way, you skipped both lunch and dinner. You sure you're all right? He gave me a look of weary patience. You fear for my constitution. Frankly, yes. Hungry wolf, hungry world. Manhattan hasn't seen such peril since Prohibition. That got the faintest flicker of a smile, the kind you could miss if you blinked. Your levity is grotesque, but I concede the point. Perhaps a small repast later. Make it sooner. If Fritz returns and finds you collapsed, he'll resign again out of guilt. Phooey, go fetch me the Cordon Doré membership list from the directory. We begin with their patrons. While I searched, the phone rang once more. Wolfe gestured for me to answer. It was Saul. I've got something, he said. 2 witnesses saw Fritz near the Norvonian embassy last night. Look nervous. That mean anything to you? Plenty. Hold that thought. I'll tell Wolfe. I relayed it. Wolfe leaned back, eyes narrowing. The Norvonian embassy. Curious. The same client state for which Kreisel prepared his banquet. You think the sauce thickens with politics? He raised his glass in a half-toast. Everything thickens with politics. He took the final sip, set the glass down, and closed his eyes again. Tomorrow morning, at 9. Orchids first, then strategy. Until then, silence. That was dismissal. I turned out the office light and headed for the door. The house felt strange, balanced between discipline and despair. Somewhere upstairs the orchids slept under steam. Downstairs the kitchen waited for a cook who might never come home. I paused at the threshold and looked back at Wolfe. Massive, unmoving, a general awaiting battle. For what it's worth, I said, if Fritz didn't do it, we'll prove it. He opened one eye. Of course he didn't, and we will. The eye closed again. The room filled with the faint hiss of beer bubbles and the sound of order reforming itself out of chaos. Rain has a way of stripping Manhattan to the bones. By 9:40 that night it had polished the sidewalks to mirrors, and every passing headlight made ghosts of the pedestrians. I rode a cab to the Cordon Doré Club, told the driver to keep the change in case civilization collapsed before I came back, and climbed the steps like a man with a tuxedo and a purpose. I had only the second. Inside, the air smelled of lemon oil and rich digestion. The doorman's eyes skimmed my suit and stopped at my tie, which apparently hadn't studied abroad. I gave him a polite nod and kept walking. The corridor to the club offices was empty, except for the hum of refrigeration and the faint echo of silver being counted. Halfway down, I passed the framed portrait of the late Chef Kreisel, glaring out at eternity with the look of a man who still disapproved of it. Around the corner, a door that should have been locked wasn't. Someone had taught the latch manners with a pick. I stepped inside and found Miss Ingrid Law kneeling on the carpet beside an open safe. Her hair was coming down, a handful of hairpins clenched between her teeth, and a ledger sprawled beside her like it had fainted from guilt. She spat the pins into her palm and tried to look like midnight bookkeeping was a department policy. "Mr. Goodwin," she said evenly. "Evening, Miss Law. Auditing or burglary with accessories?" "Shut the door, please." I shut it but left it unlocked. Fresh air is useful when things start to smoke. "You forgot to mention this part of your resume last time. I'd have brought a camera." She brushed off her knees. "I'm not stealing." "Fine," I said. "You're curating." She crossed to the cabinet and slammed a drawer. "They're hiding payments. Patron gifts listed as pantry invoices. Kreisel signed them. He was paying someone no one admits exists." "Empty name, full pockets," I said. "What name?" She handed me the ledger. The columns marched like infantry, and at the bottom was Kreisel's barbed signature. The payee line read Madam L. "I hoped it would be there," she murmured. "If I could photograph—" "No, the police will want the original. I'd rather not be in the papers for accessory to helpfulness." Her eyes flashed. "Do not patronize me." "Then explain," I said. "You and I both like stories that start before the third act. Try the part where you're related to Fritz." She hesitated, then placed both palms on the desk. "My mother's sister married his cousin in Zurich. I was a child, but he remembered me. 2 nights ago he called. He said someone wanted a certain formula and might use his name to get it. He asked me to meet him at the side entrance last night. He never came." "What formula?" "For the Norvonian embassy banquet. Not just a sauce, a ceremonial dish, centuries old. They wanted him to recreate it from a private recipe book. Which happened to vanish, I said. She nodded. He told me it was stolen. They meant to accuse him unless he cooperated. Who's they? I don't know. Kreisel said the request came through a woman, a patron's agent. She wore a dark veil, smelled of amber, gloves from Geneva. That's all I know. I flipped another page of the ledger. And now you're playing scavenger at the scene, hoping to find the missing pages before the cops do. I'm trying to clear Fritz. If they discover I'm here, they'll think I took everything. Lady, I already think that, I said. Fortunately, I'm broad-minded. A faint sound came from the hall, a soft step, then silence. I closed the ledger and set it back. Time to leave. You can tell Wolfe the rest in the morning, after orchid hours, before lunch. He gets cranky otherwise. She shook her head. They're watching. If I'm seen with you, I lose my job, and maybe more. Then we'll make an exit fit for sinners, I said. We slipped into the corridor. The lamps along the wainscoting threw polite shadows. Somewhere deeper in the club, dishes clattered. Above that came the low growl of the city's traffic bleeding through the walls. In the service passage, she stopped to lower her veil. It gave her the look of someone auditioning for a tragedy. Which way? She whispered. Left. Corner payphone. I have to call my employer. I thought you made your own decisions. I do, I said, but he pays for the mistakes. The alley was slick and mean, lit by a single bulb that made puddles look like ink. We were halfway to the street when the night hiccuped. A muffled pop, then the crash of glass. The second shot smacked brick near my ear. I pulled her down behind a stack of boxes. Stay there, I said. Another shot cracked and ricocheted off the cobblestone. Somewhere a car door slammed, tires hissed water, then silence came back heavier than before. You hurt? I asked. She shook her head under the veil. No, who? Somebody who disapproves of our accounting methods. I left her crouched there and sprinted the rest of the way to the booth. The glass was spiderwebbed, but the phone still lived. I dropped a coin and dialed home. Wolfe's voice came through instantly, as if he'd been listening to the dial tone for company. Yes? Your cook's kin just borrowed trouble, I said, and paid in silver. Explain. Ingrid Law, niece by marriage. She was digging through the club's books. Says someone wanted Fritz to deliver a royal formula for a Norvonian banquet. A gunman just decorated the scenery. She left me a souvenir. Silver ladle, royal monogram. Bring her ladle, Wolfe said, each word polished. And yourself, intact. Working on both. Do not permit the police to seize it before I examine it. You may exhibit, not surrender. Return at once. He hung up without a goodbye. Phones take that personally. When I turned, Miss Law was already standing, her purse clutched like a life raft. They shot at us because of a spoon. Ladle, I said. And not because of it, because of what it stirs. She looked toward the street. A sedan idled at the far corner, then rolled away. I can't go with you. If they see me at your house, then they'll see you at the morgue later, I said. Take your pick. Her mouth trembled, but the eyes stayed steady. Tomorrow, 11. I'll come, if they let me. That's an inspiring RSVP, I said. Here's a nickel. Call the brownstone and say orchids if you need help. Someone polite will answer. I think you'll need the nickel more, she said, and walked into the rain. The darkness folded around her like a closing curtain. I caught the next cab and rode home with the ladle under my coat. It was heavier than it looked, the handle engraved with a crown curling through 2 letters, interlaced, regal, smug, the kind of utensil that didn't ladle soup so much as family secrets. At the brownstone, the clock in the hall said 10:30 when I came in dripping. Wolfe was in the office, lamp glow outlining him like an idol built from intelligence and calories. Well? He asked. I placed the ladle on his blotter. Gift from the Norvonian monarchy. Comes with bullets. He studied it without touching. The arms are genuine. This is no reproduction. I figured. The shooter wanted it back enough to redecorate the alley. His eyes flicked to me. Quick measure. Faint relief. You are uninjured. Architecturally, yes. The bricks took most of the complaint. Describe. I gave him the short version. Office, ledger, family tie, formula, shots. He listened without motion except for one raised finger when I mentioned Madame L. An alias with possibilities, he murmured. We shall see whose vanity it conceals. He leaned back. Tomorrow you will bring Miss Law at 11. Meanwhile, the ladle goes in the safe. Fine, I said, but remind me which shelf we keep the royal silver on. He ignored that. Do so. I opened the safe and laid the ladle inside. The metal caught the lamplight and winked, mocking, like it knew more than either of us. The phone rang before I could close the door. I picked up. Goodwin. The voice was new, roughened by cigarettes and intent. Tell the fat man to return what belongs to the crown, or somebody else gets carved. Click. I set the receiver down. Wolfe was watching me, eyes dark as the ladle's reflection. Archie, he said quietly, lock it. I turned the dial until the tumblers sighed home. Outside, the rain hit the windows harder, like it had just heard the news. If you ever want to see civilization wobble on its foundations, watch Nero Wolfe pour himself black coffee at breakfast and call it a meal. The man regarded fasting as a barbarism best left to hermits and politicians, but there he was, 8:30 sharp, facing his cup like a monk facing a mortal temptation. The silver ladle lay on the blotter, gleaming like it enjoyed the attention. Wolfe's eyes moved over it as though it were a hostile witness. I'd seen him examine murder weapons with less reverence. The crest, he said finally, is unmistakable. The arms belong to the kingdom of Norvonia. I took a sip of my own coffee, cream, sugar, and no politics. Small European outfit, right? Famous for postage stamps, coups, and imported headaches, he grunted. An ill-starred monarchy now maintained by diplomacy and pretense. The ladle is not a trinket. It belongs to their royal household, one of a matched service commissioned before the war. How it arrived here is the problem. Along with who's trying to perforate witnesses, I added. He ignored that. The Norvonian embassy, he went on, lies on East 73rd. It is improbable they would entrust Kreisel or any club without authorization, yet this utensil came from there. Meaning somebody's cooking more than sauces. Wolfe's brows pulled together. I dislike culinary metaphors in criminal discourse. Sorry, I said. Next time I'll stick to homicide. He sighed, a deep bass note. I have not eaten since yesterday. My brain is fasting in sympathy. That makes two of us. Only my brain cheats. Before he could remind me that sarcasm burns no calories, the phone rang. I got it. Goodwin. Saul Panzer, said the voice, flat as always. I've got something. Spotted Fritz Brenner last night, around 10:30. Embassy district near the Norvonian loading dock. He looked nervous, carrying a satchel. Didn't see where he went. That woke Wolfe faster than food. Hold, Saul, he said, rising slightly in his chair, a gesture that, for him, counted as a sprint. You are certain? As certain as rain in March. Remain available, Wolfe ordered. Mr. Goodwin will confer shortly. He hung up and turned to me. Fetch Mr. Panzer, Mr. Cather, and Mr. Durkin, quietly. Quietly? I asked. We talking velvet gloves or kidnap masks? Your discretion suffices, he said. You will apprise them of the situation in generalities only. I want the Norvonian embassy observed. No interference, no arrests. A discreet stakeout. And if Kramer's boys get wind? Pfui. Mr. Kramer will attend his own stew when served. I left him muttering to the ladle and went to the phone alcove. Saul answered on the second ring, Ori on the third, complaining about overtime. Fred took 5 rings and sounded winded, probably chasing a lead or lunch. By noon, the 3 were assembled in our front room, dripping rain on Fritz's spotless rug. Wolfe stayed upstairs with orchids, leaving me to deliver the sermon. Short version, I told them. Our client is missing, possibly framed, probably alive. He's been seen near the Norvonian embassy, which may be running a sideline in culinary espionage. We want eyes on that building, not headlines. Keep it clean. Fred scratched his head. Embassy, huh? Can't touch it without the feds. Exactly. So don't touch it. Just watch who goes in and out, especially anyone who looks like a cook, a diplomat, or both. Ori smirked. You want us to tail people wearing aprons and medals? Use your imagination. Saul, you coordinate. Call me from the booth on Madison every hour. They dispersed like smoke, leaving me the scent of wet coats and suspicion. By 2 o'clock the rain had thinned to drizzle, and I was parked across from the Norvonian embassy in the Heron Coupe, pretending to read Esquire. The building itself was a dignified slice of stone, wedged between a doctor's office and a piano school. Flags hung limp, Guards in grey uniforms loitered like they were auditioning for neutrality. At 3:30, Saul ambled up beside the car, umbrella folded, expression unreadable. Ori's watching the front. Fred's got the service gate. You might want to see what just went in. He pointed with the umbrella. A dark sedan had pulled to the curb. From it stepped Miss Ingrid Law, looking less like a secretary and more like a woman attending her own inquest. 2 men in embassy livery escorted her inside through the side door. "Friend of yours," Saul said. "Former bookkeeper," I corrected, "and apparently promoted to diplomat." "Want me to tail her?" "No," I said. "We'd lose her the minute she hits carpet. Just keep watch for when she comes out, if she does." Saul nodded and melted away again. I stayed where I was, letting the puzzle stew. Fritz, the missing chef, now linked to an embassy, a stolen recipe, a murdered rival, and a royal ladle. Miss Law, stepping into the lion's den, completed the menu nicely. At 4:10, Wolfe's orchid hour, I ducked into a payphone on the corner and dialed home. Fritz might be gone, but Fritz's precision had rubbed off on me. Wolfe's routine was sacred, even when the world burned. "Report," came his voice after one ring. "Your niece-in-law just checked in at the Norvonian embassy under escort. 2 gents in uniform walked her past the guards. Looks official." Wolfe's tone sharpened. "Describe her condition." "Composed. No handcuffs, no bouquet. She's either invited or very brave." "Huh, there is a distinction." "Not much. You want me to intercept her?" "No," he said. "Observe. If she remains after dark, assume she is detained or complicit. Either eventuality interests me." "Fine. But just so we're clear, if the United Nations ever needs a private eye, I'm bringing my own coffee. They don't pay for refills." "Your levity grows tiresome," he said, though I heard the faint exhale that passed for indulgence. "Continue your vigil until 8, then home." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes. Inform Mr. Pantzer I shall require his presence tomorrow morning at 9. "Orchid hours?" "Precisely." I hung up, stepped out, and lit a cigarette under the awning. The embassy windows glowed faintly behind the rain. No sign of Miss Law or anyone else inclined to confess. Around 6, Ori radioed through a corner phone that nothing had changed except the weather. Fred reported a brief delivery, crates labelled wine, and a guard whose curiosity outpaced his salary. Nothing else. By 8, Wolfe's dinner bell would be chiming in an empty kitchen, and my patience had the consistency of soup. I gave Saul the nod to close down and drove back to West 35th. When I entered the office, Wolfe was at his desk, the ladle gone from sight, the smell of coffee lingering. His bulk looked carved from concentration. "Well?" he said. "They're quiet," I told him. "Embassy still standing, Miss Law still inside. Saul's keeping a skeleton watch." He nodded once. "So, the embassy shelters both the ladle's origin and our fugitive cook. The coincidence is intolerable." "Then what's next?" He reached for the bell cord. "Dinner. I shall eat." That was news. Theodore appeared in the doorway with visible relief, tray in hand. Wolfe inhaled deeply. "Black coffee," he said, "but perhaps tomorrow. Sausage." "Progress," I said. He glanced up. "Indeed. We have fed the mind. The body may follow." I grinned. "Let's hope your brain leaves room for dessert. This case might need it." He closed his eyes, savouring the coffee's steam. "Phooey, go type your report." And just like that, order, his version of it, returned to the brownstone. Next afternoon, by 3 o'clock, the city was drowning itself in drizzle and self-pity. Rain tapped the office windows like a bill collector, and the brownstone felt even quieter than usual, which for us is saying something. Wolfe was behind his desk with the look of a man trying to outstare a teapot. I was debating whether to risk another cup of coffee when the front bell rang, one sharp jab that could only mean a man with no patience and too much authority. I opened the door, and there he was, Inspector Kramer, rain steaming off his coat, hat in one hand, cigar in the other. The cigar was unlit, which meant the world had taken a wrong turn. "Afternoon, Inspector," I said. "You look like democracy after a storm." "Save the cracks, Goodwin. He in?" "He's vertical, breathing and considering caffeine. That counts." Kramer brushed past me into the office. Wolfe looked up, saw the hat in his hand, and raised an eyebrow. "Well," he said, "a symbol of conciliation. Don't start, Kramer grumbled, sinking into the red leather chair across from him. I'm here because the DA's sitting on my neck. The press says your chef carved a man like Sunday roast. The DA wants him in cuffs yesterday. Ah, Wolfe murmured. So hysteria governs policy again. Kramer glared. You got anything to make it stop? Wolfe folded his hands. Possibly, but you've brought a gift. Kramer frowned. Gift? The cigar, Wolfe said. Unlit. It denotes restraint, a quality you seldom cultivate. Archie Goodwin, diplomat at large, stepped in. What the boss means is, we're touched. Want me to frame it? Kramer grunted something impolite and produced an envelope from his coat. Here. Maybe it'll light something else. Inside was a small menu card, thick as linen, smudged at one corner with dried sauce and a faint scent of garlic that could have raised Fritz from the dead. On the back were rows of letters and numbers written in Kreisel's compact scrawl. We found it in the dead man's pocket, Kramer said. The boys think it's shorthand. I think it's baloney, but you like puzzles. Wolfe adjusted his spectacles and bent over the card. His lips moved slightly as his eyes tracked the symbols. I've seen him do that before, the silent digestion of facts, as if he were tasting logic instead of food. Finally, he sat back. Not shorthand, he said. A cipher. Cipher for what? For recipes. Kramer blinked. Come again? Observe, Wolfe said, tapping the card. The sequence F12B3R7. These are not coordinates but abbreviations for ingredients. F for fleur, B for beurre, R for roux. It references dishes by the initials of their French names. Each combination corresponds to one of Fritz Brenner's private creations, formulas he refused to publish or sell. Kramer stared. You telling me Kreisel carried around a codebook for cooking? Not merely cooking, Wolfe said, for smuggling. Replace the culinary ingredients with contraband equivalents, and you have a list of shipments disguised as menus. Ingenious, if contemptible. That hit even me. So the whole gourmet act was a cover? Possibly, or perhaps only the banquet arrangements. The Norvonians may have used cuisine as camouflage for transmitting diplomatic secrets. Kramer grunted. Then what's Fritz's part? Unwitting participant, Wolfe said. He was valued for his discretion. Someone exploited that. Try selling that to the DA, Kramer muttered. All he sees is a missing chef and a knife with his initials. Then tell him to look again, I said. You ever seen Fritz handle a knife like that? He'd scold you for bruising parsley. Kramer rubbed his face. You two are giving me ulcers. I don't buy that Brenner's a killer, but I can't tell the papers that. They're running Wolfe's chef turns butcher above the fold. The commissioner's ready to send a detail here just to shut you up. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That would be ill-advised. I told them that, Kramer said, voice rising, but unless I get results, they'll act. So here I am, hat in hand. Wolfe studied him a moment, then reached for the bell cord. Archie, beer. That was the diplomatic version of a handshake. I fetched a bottle and poured, chilled glass and all. Kramer accepted it with the care of a man handling evidence. Wolfe took his own glass, raised it slightly. Inspector, you are a man of sense, though occasionally misled by zeal. You recognize that justice is ill-served by haste. Kramer snorted. I recognize that the DA eats headlines for breakfast. I need something solid, a direction, a suspect, anything. Then you shall have a hint, Wolfe said. The cipher refers to recipes that exist only in Fritz Brenner's notebook. Find who obtained that book, and you'll find your murderer. Kramer eyed him. You're holding out. Conditionally, Wolfe said smoothly. You will refrain from harassing my staff or my associates. No raids, no summons. You will grant Mr. Goodwin freedom of movement. Kramer's jaw worked around the unlit cigar. You're bargaining with a homicide. Indeed. You require cooperation. I require courtesy. The arrangement benefits both. He stared another moment, then sighed and jammed the cigar between his teeth. All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report. But if the DA breathes fire, I'm sending the smoke your way. Accepted, Wolfe said. I leaned back. Inspector, if this keeps up, the city ought to issue Wolfe a badge. Kramer turned to me. Yeah? He'd never fit in the uniform. Wolfe's lips twitched. Only if it fits my waistline. That cracked even Kramer. A single puff of laughter escaped, disguised as a cough. He rose, pulling on his coat. "One more thing," he said, fishing into his pocket. "Press boys got wind of that embassy angle. If you've got foreign trouble brewing, keep it out of my precinct." Wolfe inclined his head. "The trouble, I assure you, is already imported." "Great," Kramer muttered. "Just what we need. International gravy." He headed for the door. I followed, and as I opened it, he paused. "For the record, Wolfe," he said gruffly, "I don't think your man did it, but the evidence don't care what I think." Wolfe's reply was quiet. "Then we must enlighten the evidence." When the door closed behind him, the office seemed to breathe again. Wolfe sipped his beer. I collected the empty envelope from the desk. "So," I said, "we've got a cipher menu, a dead chef, and a missing cook. What's the next course?" He leaned back, eyes half shut. "Digestion, Archie. Then inference." "That's two things you're good at," I said. He opened one eye. "Type your notes." "Yes, sir, but if this turns into an international food fight, I'm charging extra." He ignored that. Outside, the rain thickened again, drumming steady on the glass, as if applauding the performance none of us wanted to attend. If Manhattan has a conscience, it hides it in fog. By 9 that night, the park was smothered in a mist thick enough to drown streetlights. I'd had one dinnerless hour to digest Saul's report. An hour ago, the Norvonian cultural attaché turned up dead from poison at a private embassy supper, Fritz Brenner sighted in the vicinity, and Kramer already sharpening subpoenas like steak knives. I left the brownstone with my coat collar up and my temper down. Wolfe had given no order. He'd only said, "Bring him home if you can, Archie. If you cannot, bring understanding," which is his version of saying, "Don't fail, but don't get shot doing it." The park was nearly deserted except for a few silhouettes pretending to be respectable. The fog turned every lamppost into a haloed ghost, and my shoes sank into puddles that hadn't read the forecast. Halfway down the mall I saw him, Fritz, hunched on a bench beneath the bronze author whose works no one reads anymore. His hat drooped, his overcoat sagged with rain, and his usually perfect grooming looked as if he'd been chased by guilt itself. "Evening," I said softly. He flinched, then turned. "Archie." His accent thickened the word until it sounded like apology. "You should not be here." "Neither should you, unless Central Park started serving consommé." He tried for dignity. "I wish to think." "Fine. Think while we walk. Unless you've developed a taste for pneumonia." He didn't move. "You must not tell Mr. Wolfe you saw me." "That's going to be difficult. He sent me." That got him. His head came up sharply, eyes glinting in the mist. "He sent you?" "Personally, between orchid shifts. He's worried sick, which is an event of national interest." Fritz's breath came unsteadily. "He must not interfere. It is dangerous." "Sure. Everything's dangerous lately, including breakfast. Now let's make this easy. What's the game, Fritz? You mix sauces for the wrong people?" He turned away, gripping the back of the bench like it was a confessional rail. "You will not understand." "Try me. I've been understanding murder for years. It's part of the benefits package." Silence stretched, filled only by the hiss of rain on branches. Then he spoke, low and flat. "They forced me. 2 men came to the club. They knew of my recipe, the ceremonial sauce of Norvonia, made for their royal banquets. They said it contained the key to a message, a code. At first I laughed, but they showed me—" His hand trembled. "A capsule of wax, like one I used to seal flavor essences. Inside it was film, tiny rolls, smaller than my smallest onion seeds." I whistled. Microfilm in Béarnaise. Only Fritz could turn a sauce into espionage. He shuddered. "They demanded I make more, exactly the same. They said they would send it to the embassy as a tribute, and I must say nothing. I refused." "Good for you." "They said if I refused again, they would accuse Mr. Wolfe. Say he sold secrets through his chef. They had forged papers, letters, even a photograph." That stopped my wisecracks cold. "They used Wolfe's name?" "Yes, I could not allow it. I made the sauce." He covered his face with his hands. "Kreisel was to deliver it, but he quarreled with them. He wanted money, too much, so they killed him." I sat beside him. The bench creaked like it objected. "And the attaché?" He looked up, eyes hollow. He was the one who ordered the sauce. Perhaps he knew what it carried. Perhaps not. But he is dead, and they will say again, Fritz Brenner. Yeah, I said, and the DA will serve it up with garnish. He slumped forward. I cannot return. If I am seen, it will lead them to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. It was like touching a stone left out in rain. Fritz, Wolfe's already knee-deep in this. Hiding doesn't protect him, it just leaves him hungry. And between us, I can't survive another day of him fasting on coffee. A faint smile ghosted his mouth. He refuses food. Black coffee only. Theodore's threatening to call the Red Cross. He made a small, pained sound, half laugh, half groan. He must eat. Then come back and feed him. No, he said, shaking his head. Not until he is safe. I leaned closer. Safe from who? He hesitated, then whispered, From Norvonia. I blinked. You mean the embassy? They are not all loyal to the same master. There is a faction, one that smuggles documents through diplomatic pouches. The sauce was their carrier. They used my recipe to disguise the wax capsules. I think perhaps the attaché tried to expose them, so they poisoned him. That's patriotic of them. They will say it was I, and if they cannot find me, they will accuse Mr. Wolfe. They warned me. They have connections in the papers, in the police. They will make it true by repetition. I exhaled slowly. All right, listen, we'll fix this our way. Saul's already watching the embassy. Ori and Fred are covering the streets. You come home, stay locked in the kitchen, and let Wolfe handle the fireworks. He shook his head stubbornly. You do not understand his pride. If they drag him into politics, he will suffer more than hunger. I understand plenty, I said. I've been his punching bag for 8 years. But he doesn't crack under pressure. He inflates. You think you're protecting him by hiding? You're just giving his enemies more room to aim. He didn't answer. The fog thickened around us, curling like steam from a boiling pot. A police siren wailed faintly from the avenue, then faded. Fritz, I said quietly, look at me. He did. I give you my word. I'll keep Wolfe clear of the politics, the embassy, the works. You just come home and tell him the truth. We'll handle the rest. He studied me a long moment, then nodded once. You are a good man, Archie. I will trust you. That's a rare mistake, but I'll take it. I stood, glancing toward the path. Come on, my trench coat's big enough for both of us if you don't mind smelling like tobacco and gun oil. We started walking toward the park exit. The fog swallowed our footsteps. He was shivering, from cold or conscience I couldn't tell. At the corner of 72nd he paused. If I am followed, you won't be. Saul's better than that. But if I am, I will not go to the house. I will disappear until it is finished. Fritz. He met my eyes, weary but firm. Promise me. I wanted to argue, but the man's pride was as stubborn as Wolfe's waistline. Fine, I said. You vanish only if it keeps Wolfe clean. Otherwise straight home. That's the deal. He nodded. Then, before I could say more, he turned down the opposite path and vanished into the mist, moving quicker than I'd thought he could. I watched until the fog ate him whole. Somewhere behind me, a patrol whistle blew. Too close, too late. I pulled my collar higher and headed for the street. The lamps burned like dying candles, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Fritz Brenner, the gentlest cook in Manhattan, had just stepped into a fire that no recipe could cool. And for once, I didn't have an appetite either. By 9:30, the brownstone smelled like crime and cognac, which in our line of work usually means Wolfe's thinking. He sat behind his desk, surrounded by an army of index cards and photostats Saul shot from Kreisel's file, Fritz's formulas in his own hand, each sheet so spotless it could have been sterilized. Before I spun the dial on the safe, I snapped a glossy for the file. Wolfe liked his relics available at eye level. He was studying them the way a priest studies confessions, one finger resting on the ladle photograph like it was a holy relic. Across from him, Saul Panzer leaned against the filing cabinet, hat low, face unreadable. I'd seen Saul track down escaped killers with less attention than he was giving to a piece of paper titled Béarnaise Royale Version Privé. I said, if I ever open a restaurant, remind me to hire you 3. We'll call it Chez Conspiracy. Wolfe's glare could have curdled milk. Archie, silence is preferable to comedy and more nutritious. Yes, sir, but it won't sell tickets. He ignored that. Observe this notation, he said. tapping a line of Fritz's neat script. Wax capsules, double-sealed, melt at 130 degrees. The Norvonians adapted it. They embedded microfilm within the capsules, disguised as essence beads. Saul nodded. Smart. No customs agent would look twice at kitchen supplies. Indeed, a most perfidious use of culinary art. Wolfe's tone had the moral weight of scripture. Fritz's formula was merely a recipe for perfection. They debased it to cloak espionage. Fui. I leaned on the desk. So we're agreed the sauce smuggled secrets, not paprika. How do we catch who's ordering takeout? He steepled his fingers. We invite them to dinner. That was my cue to roll my eyes. Meaning? We shall stage an illusion. 10 minutes earlier, the door buzzer had chirped. Lon Cohen blowing in with damp cuffs and a notebook, hungry for a headline, and now he sat on the sofa jotting headlines. We'll place an announcement in tomorrow's Gazette that Nero Wolfe, consulting for the police, has decoded the Norvonian formula and will display his findings publicly. Lon looked up. Front page or society column? Whichever ensures appetite, I grinned. Nothing like serving bait with garnish. Saul asked, You think they'll bite that fast? They cannot afford not to, Wolfe said. If our supposition is correct, the microfilm carried the names of Norvonian agents in America. Exposure means ruin. They will attempt to retrieve or destroy it before sunrise. And that means, I said, we keep our doorbell well oiled. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, murmuring, and my orchids undisturbed. By 10:30, Lon's piece was written and wired to the Gazette's night desk. The headline would read, Famed gourmet sleuth to expose international sauce scandal. I told Lon it lacked poetry. He told me it sold papers. Saul left to position himself outside the Norvonian embassy. I went over to the typewriter to prepare Wolfe's statement, which was nothing but theatrical gravy, a paragraph about national honour and culinary integrity, written in Wolfe's best imitation of diplomacy. While I typed, Wolfe dictated from his chair, voice rich and deliberate. The purity of cuisine is akin to the purity of statecraft. When the former is corrupted, the latter follows. I said, You know, if the State Department ever needs a chef, they're all yours. He didn't rise to the bait. When Wolfe is plotting, humour slides off him like oil on a skillet. By midnight, the brownstone had the quiet tension of a loaded trap. Wolfe had forbidden beer. A mind so occupied must not be dulled, and settled instead for black coffee, which meant the situation was dire. At 12:15 the phone rang. Saul's voice came through, calm as an accountant. Embassy lights just went on. Dawn's secretary made 3 calls, 1 international. Then a messenger left by cab headed downtown. Wolfe gestured. I scribbled notes. Follow, he ordered. Already am, Saul said, and hung up. For 20 minutes we listened to the city hum through the rain, each tick of the clock another spoonful of suspense. Then the downstairs bell rang, 1 short, 1 long. Messenger, I said. Wolfe nodded. Admit him. The young man at the door could have been a college clerk, thin, polite, carrying a waterproof envelope with diplomatic wax seals. He said, For Mr. Nero Wolfe, from Baron Dawn of the Norvonian embassy. I took it. You want a receipt? He smiled faintly. I'll wait. That was his mistake. I set the envelope on the desk. Wolfe inspected the seal, lifted one brow, then used his letter opener like a surgeon. Inside were 2 items, a folded telegram form and a small brass key. The telegram, he murmured, is blank. Curious. I flipped it over and saw a faint impression, as if the carbon paper had been removed too soon. Wolfe fetched a sheet of tissue, laid it over and rubbed lightly with pencil dust. Letters appeared, ghostly but legible. I read aloud, Retrieve recipe immediately, exposure fatal, destroy ladle, confirm at once, D. Baron Dawn himself, Wolfe said. And the key? Locker tag, I guessed, turning it over. Penn Station, number 314. He nodded. Predictable. Saul will intercept it. Right on cue, the phone rang again. Saul's low voice said, Got him. The messenger tried the locker. Inside, blank wax capsules, and a paper copy of Fritz's recipe. Police now have it. Excellent, Wolfe said. Inform Inspector Kramer that the courier serves Baron Dawn. The cipher confirms it. I couldn't help grinning. If brains were calories, Wolfe just gained 10 pounds. He ignored me, which I took as affection. Archie, telephone the Gazette. Mr. Cohen will print a retraction stating the formula has been recovered and the exposure averted. That will flush Dawn's next move. You really think he'll come himself? He must. His aide's failure endangers him. Greed and fear are relentless motivators, even among diplomats. By 1:30, the paper edition had gone to press with the update. Embassy source denies smuggling scandal. Wolfe confirms proof of innocence. It was the kind of double-speak that makes truth dizzy. Saul returned just before 2, soaked but satisfied. Locker evidence is solid. Kramer's men took Dawn's aide in for questioning. The Baron's sweating bullets under immunity. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded. Justice, Mr. Panzer, is occasionally best served à la carte. I stretched and yawned. So we've caught the thief, cleared Fritz, and ruined diplomatic digestion. Not bad for a night's work. Wolfe's gaze softened a fraction. Fritz will return when he deems it proper. See to it that he finds his kitchen intact. I'll guard the silverware personally. He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. You jest, but I rely upon you. Sure, I said, like a man relies on gravity. The clock struck 2. Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Coffee, Archie, then sleep. Tomorrow we dine. That sounded like paradise. I went to fetch the tray, and as I did, the rain outside eased into silence. By morning, the Gazette headline had the city buzzing. Baron Dawn was under investigation, and Fritz Brenner was on his way home. And somewhere between the smell of coffee and the clink of silver, I realized that Wolfe had done it again, turned deception into dessert and served it cold. If Nero Wolfe ever wanted to overthrow a government, he'd start with the menu. That evening, the brownstone smelled like an international treaty, heavy on butter and betrayal. The dining room was set for 6, the silver polished so bright even gilt would have seen its reflection. I'd seen Wolfe host plenty of dinners, but this one had more suspense than a firing squad at dessert time. The guest list read like a diplomatic scandal sheet. Baron Heinrich Dawn, aide to the Norvonian ambassador. Miss Ingrid Law, our mysterious niece by marriage turned whistleblower. Inspector Kramer, wearing his best "I hate being here" expression, and a junior envoy named Dravik, whose cufflinks could have paid our taxes twice over. And of course Wolfe presided at the head of the table, his bulk framed like a king before coronation. The kitchen door breathed steam and discipline. Wolfe had staged it like theatre, a borrowed toque, a lower light, a path from range to door rehearsed twice. The kitchen door breathed steam and purpose. Wolfe had staged it like theatre, a borrowed toque, a dimmer light, a silent cue from me at the door. What none of them knew, except me and Wolfe, was that Mr. Frey, the unassuming Swiss chef supervising the kitchen, was none other than Fritz Brenner in disguise. Wolfe had insisted on the alias to keep Fritz safe until the final course of justice was served. Fritz, for his part, looked like a saint sentenced to cook his own last supper. I took my seat beside Miss Law, who smelled faintly of lilac and anxiety. "You realize," I murmured, "this is the only dinner in Manhattan where the chef and the detective are both undercover." She managed a tremulous smile. "And you, Mr. Goodwin? Are you the waiter or the executioner?" "Depends who orders the check," I said. At 8 o'clock sharp, because Wolfe keeps time the way generals keep armies, he lifted his glass. "Gentlemen, Miss Law, this dinner is, as you have surmised, both culinary and conciliatory. Certain recent events have disturbed the pleasant equilibrium between our nations. I propose we restore it, by the palate, if not yet by the pen." Baron Dawn gave a polite bow, his pale eyes watchful. "Mr. Wolfe, diplomacy could learn from cuisine, though, as I recall, chefs rarely survive their mistakes." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Fortunately, neither do liars." That earned a blink from Dawn and a snort from Kramer, who was wrestling his napkin like it owed him money. "Let's skip the philosophy, Wolfe. I'm here because the commissioner said you promised no funny business." "None whatsoever," Wolfe said smoothly, "except perhaps for dessert." I coughed discreetly to hide a grin. Fritz's first course arrived. Consomme royale, delicate enough to make angels jealous. The guests murmured their approval. Dawn took a sip, eyes closing with theatrical pleasure. "Exquisite. Your cook is a genius." "Mr. Fry," Wolfe said, "is indeed capable. Genius, however, Must be directed. Otherwise, it may produce explosions. I saw Miss Law stiffen slightly, and Dawn's spoon paused mid-air. The only sound for a moment was the faint clink of silver and Kramer's grunt of appreciation. Course followed course, salmon mousse, pheasant under glass, and finally a salad so ornate it looked like a peace treaty garnished with parsley. Wolfe kept the conversation polite but edged, asking Dawn about trade imports, about diplomatic shipments labelled culinary supplies, and about the late attaché's fondness for béarnaise. Dawn's answers were as smooth as Fritz's sauces. Kramer chewed methodically, his cigar stub tucked in a dish beside his plate like a hostage. "You know, Baron," he said, "for a diplomat, you've had a busy week. Your attaché drops dead, your courier vanishes, your embassy telephones the Gazette for corrections. Makes a man wonder what kind of stew you're cooking." Dawn smiled thinly. "Inspector, international affairs are seldom palatable to the public." "Yeah? Well, this one's leaving a bad aftertaste." Wolfe intervened before Kramer could start seasoning the air with sarcasm. "Gentlemen, let us not spoil the pheasant with politics. There remains dessert." At his signal, Fritz appeared, white jacket immaculate, face serene, carrying a silver tray with 6 parfait glasses gleaming like trophies, the room filled with the scent of vanilla and almonds. "Crème glacée royale," Wolfe announced, "a humble experiment in culinary reconstruction." He waited until Fritz set the final dish and withdrew silently to the kitchen, then continued. "Each serving contains a small element of history. Within the frozen cream lies a replica of the method that caused so much misery, a capsule of harmless wax, identical in form to those used in the smuggling of microfilm. You may eat it safely, though I advise against biting too hard." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Miss Law gasped softly. Dawn's hand, halfway to his spoon, trembled. Kramer's eyes narrowed. "You mean to tell me—" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Mr. Brenner's technique has been duplicated, without danger, without deceit. Proof that he was coerced, not complicit." Dawn gave a short laugh. "Ingenious, Mr. Wolfe, truly. But what does this confection prove, except your chef's skill?" "It proves," Wolfe said, "that the only ingredient missing from the original recipe was your guilt." The Baron's smile froze faster than the dessert. "You accuse me?" "I do." Wolfe's voice deepened, resonant. "You, Baron Dawn, directed the scheme. You required the capsules for your clandestine communications. When your agent Kreisel demanded more money, you silenced him. When the attaché suspected, you poisoned him. And when suspicion threatened your name, you sought to destroy Fritz Brenner and me." Kramer slammed his palm on the table. "Wolfe, you got proof or poetry?" Wolfe inclined his head. "Proof." He pointed toward Dawn's untouched glass. "That serving, Baron, is not identical to the others. It contains one genuine capsule recovered from the embassy locker. You will find it quite distinctive in texture." Dawn's eyes darted to the parfait, then back to Wolfe. His lips parted as if to protest, but instead his hand slipped beneath his jacket. Kramer was faster than I've ever seen him move. He lunged across the table, grabbing Dawn's wrist. A small vial clattered onto the linen, rolling until it struck Miss Law's plate. She recoiled. The vial's label, half torn, read arson, before the rest disappeared under Kramer's hand. "Poison," Kramer growled. "You were going to spike your own evidence." The Baron sagged, colour draining. "You fools," he hissed. "You meddle in affairs beyond you." Wolfe's tone was glacial. "Indeed, yet justice is a domestic art." Kramer gestured to me. "Get Stebbins in here." I moved to the hall, signalling Saul, who'd been stationed by the door with Stebbins and 2 uniforms. Within moments they had Dawn secured and the vial bagged. Kramer, dusting his sleeves, gave Wolfe a look halfway between irritation and reluctant admiration. "You set him up good," he said, "though next time, warn me before dessert turns into an arrest." Wolfe exhaled, a long, satisfied sound. "Inspector, for warning you would have deprived me of the pleasure of your efficiency." "Yeah, well," Kramer said, lighting his long cold cigar, "you can stick your pleasure in the evidence locker." But there was the faintest smile under the smoke. Miss Law sat trembling, eyes on her untouched parfait. "Mr. Wolfe," she whispered, "will Fritz be safe now?" "Safe," Wolfe said softly, "and exonerated. The truth like flavour, must be properly presented. I stepped to the kitchen door. Fritz was standing there, pale and still, cap in hand. When he met Wolfe's gaze, something wordless passed between them. Gratitude, pride, and a touch of wounded loyalty healed at last. Wolfe lifted his glass toward him. "Mr. Brenner, justice has been served, by your own hand." Fritz's voice trembled. "Danke, Herr Wolfe." Kramer cleared his throat. "If the cook's back on duty, maybe I can finally eat in peace." "You already have," I said, "and for once it didn't kill you." He grunted, pocketing the vial. "Don't tempt me, Goodwin." As the police escorted Dawn out, the dining room settled into uneasy calm. The scent of almonds lingered, mixing with the metallic tang of aftermath. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. "Archie," he said, "you may remove the replicas before Fritz's sense of precision compels him to wash them." "Yes, sir, but I'd like to point out, this is the first case we've solved with ice cream." He allowed himself a thin smile. A suitable medium, cold yet revealing. I gathered the glasses, still half full of Wolfe's triumph. Miss Law excused herself softly, and Kramer lingered just long enough to mutter, "I'll write the report. You write the cookbook." When the door finally closed behind him, Wolfe sighed, almost humanly. Confound it. A pity he cannot appreciate a proper menu. I set the last dish on Fritz's tray. "Dinner was a smash," I said. Literally, the Baron smashed his glass before Kramer smashed his alibi. Wolfe's eyes opened, amused despite himself. "Archie, your facility for vulgar phrasing is a constant trial." "Sure," I said, "but it keeps the reports lively." He pulled the bell cord once. "Have Fritz bring the beer." That was the signal. Peace restored, the household back in orbit. I leaned against the desk, watching him settle into the comfort of victory. The man could unmask international spies without leaving his dining room, and still complain if the beer wasn't cold enough. When Fritz re-entered, carrying the frosted glass with hands that no longer trembled, Wolfe accepted it with a nod that was half benediction. "To truth," Wolfe said. "To dinner," I replied. He took a long, dignified sip. "Both, Archie, are best consumed slowly," I grinned. "Not tonight. Tonight we earn dessert." He closed his eyes, content at last, and I knew the case and the course were finished. When Fritz Brenner came home, civilization followed him through the door. It was 5:30 in the evening, and the brownstone smelled like redemption in a roasting pan. The aromas drifting from the kitchen, duck, rosemary, garlic, and something suspiciously angelic, wrapped the air so thick that even the dust motes looked grateful. For a week the house had been too quiet, too sterile, too un-Fritz. Now it breathed again. Wolfe was in the dining room, enthroned at the head of the table in his yellow silk robe, the kind that made him look like an emperor with cholesterol. He was trying, with heroic futility, to appear composed. The table gleamed under the chandelier, the crystal catching the last amber flicker of dusk. I'd seen coronations with less ceremony. Fritz stood near the sideboard, apron immaculate, eyes suspiciously bright. "Dinner is ready, Herr Wolfe," he said, and his voice had that tremor of a man returning to sacred ground. Wolfe's nostrils flared. "So I perceive. Mr. Goodwin, attend." "Always do," I said, taking my seat. "Though tonight I might take dictation with gravy." He sent me a look that could have buttered the rolls. "Archie, tonight I am inclined to forgive even you. Sit." "Forgive me? What did I do?" "Nothing. Yet." The first platter appeared, and Fritz unveiled it like a masterpiece. Roast duck à l'orange, skin crisp to bronze perfection, surrounded by apples baked in brandy. The sight alone was enough to raise the national morale. "Fritz," Wolfe said, his voice thick with suppressed reverence, "I congratulate you. If the angels dine, they must envy this." Fritz bowed slightly, colour rising in his cheeks. "Danke, Herr Wolfe. It is my honour." We started eating, and for 5 blissful minutes, conversation was not only unnecessary, but sacrilegious. Wolfe carved, savoured, and devoured with the focus of a man fulfilling divine purpose. Watching him eat that duck was like watching a cathedral drink sunlight. When he finally leaned back, eyes half shut, I decided it was safe to speak. "The Gazette gave you a full column this morning," I said. "Headline, Culinary detective clears his chef, saves diplomacy. Phooey, Wolfe murmured without opening his eyes. Journalistic hyperbole. I detest the press. Funny, I said. They don't detest you. There's a sketch of your head. Looks like Mount Rushmore in an apron. That earned me a glare, but only half-hearted. Mr. Cohen must learn proportion. Actually, I said, he told me it sold 20,000 extra copies. Then he must learn taste. From the kitchen doorway, Fritz chuckled quietly, polishing the silver coffee service. Herr Wolfe, you should be pleased. The people understand justice was done. I am not a crusader for public satisfaction, Wolfe said, sniffing. I am a private man. The truth required no headline. Still, I said, you didn't exactly hide from it. He ignored me, reaching for his glass. The Norvonian embassy's retraction suffices. The Baron deported, the attaché avenged, and Mr. Brenner restored. Those are the only verdicts that concern me. Don't forget Kramer's visit tomorrow, I said. He called, said he's dropping by off the clock. His words. Off the clock. Wolfe arched an eyebrow. He should learn there is no hour free from his officiousness. Be fair, I said. He's bringing a bottle. Of beer? Bourbon, he grimaced. A barbaric concession. Still, he may pour, provided he refrains from speech. That, of course, was too much to hope for. At 7:30 sharp, the doorbell rang. Fritz went himself, something he never does unless the guest qualifies as family. Moments later, Kramer filled the doorway like a rain cloud in a fedora, cigar already chewing itself to pieces. Evening, he said. Didn't come to argue. Came to toast. Wolfe inclined his head. A rare intention, Inspector. Please, sit. Kramer eyed the dining table. Smells better than a precinct Christmas party. If this is peace, I could get used to it. It is peace, Wolfe said, restored through perseverance and proper seasoning. Kramer snorted. You and your seasoning. All I know is the State Department's sleeping again, and my commissioners stopped yelling. That's good enough for me. Indeed, Wolfe said, taking a slow sip of beer. Peace through digestion. The oldest diplomacy. I poured the bourbon for Kramer and a ginger ale for myself. You know, Inspector, I said, for a man who swore he'd never enjoy dinner here again, you're making record time. He scowled good-naturedly. Don't push your luck, Goodwin. I wouldn't dream of it. Not while you're holding the glass. He took a sip and sighed. Wolfe, you may be insufferable, but I'll give you this. Your chef's got more class than most ambassadors. Fritz, polishing the last fork, inclined his head modestly. Danke, Inspector. I prefer cooking to politics. And humanity thanks you, I said. Kramer chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. So, Brenner, you really going to forgive him? He jerked a thumb at Wolfe. He made you cook in disguise. Fritz smiled faintly. It was necessary. I trust Herr Wolfe always. Wolfe's eyelids lifted. And I, him. Few men possess both integrity and taste. Mr. Brenner does. It was as close to affection as Wolfe ever gets without requiring medical attention. Kramer rubbed his jaw. If I didn't know better, I'd think you two were sentimental. Pfui, Wolfe said. I am precise, not sentimental. Yeah, sure, I said. That's why you're smiling like a man who just ate absolution. He grunted. Archie. Yes, sir. Refrain. From what? From words. I grinned but took the hint. The room had settled into that rare kind of comfort you only get after a storm. The clink of silver, the low hum of Fritz clearing dishes, Kramer's chair creaking as he relaxed, Wolfe's breathing deep and slow like a man reciting a silent prayer. When the last of the plates disappeared, Fritz reappeared at the door with coffee. Wolfe took his cup with ceremony. Mr. Brenner, he said, before you vanish to your kitchen refuge, there remains one small matter. He reached into the desk drawer beside him and withdrew a sealed envelope, thick enough to buy a minor nation. Your back wages and interest. I would be remiss if your service were not fully recompensed. Fritz froze, blinking rapidly. Herr Wolfe, this is too much. It is exact, Wolfe said firmly. I do not owe. I balance. Fritz's hand trembled slightly as he accepted it. You are too generous. I am not generous, Wolfe corrected. Merely just. A man cannot saute on sentiment. That almost broke Fritz. He nodded deeply and retreated to the kitchen before the emotion boiled over. Kramer exhaled through his nose. You know, Wolfe, if you ever quit detection, you could make a living as a priest. Confession by menu. Blasphemy, Wolfe muttered, but his tone lacked venom. I poured the last of the bourbon for Kramer. So, Inspector, what's the official word on the Baron? Deported this morning. The Norvonians called it recall to service, which is diplomat speak for beat it before the cuffs fit. He'll be counting forks in exile for a long time. Good, I said. New York's too crowded anyway. Kramer set down his glass. Funny thing, everybody downtown's calling it your culinary deduction. Papers ate it up. Idiocy, Wolfe said. Deduction, culinary or otherwise, is merely logic applied to appetite. Whatever you call it, Kramer said, rising. It saved me a pile of paperwork. And you cleared a good man's name. I'll drink to that. He raised his glass. To Fritz. We all echoed it. Wolfe with stately gravity, me with real satisfaction. Fritz's kitchen door stayed closed, but I swear I heard him pause inside. Kramer set down the empty glass. All right, Wolfe. I'll leave you to your orchids or whatever. Try not to start another international incident before breakfast. Wolfe inclined his head. I shall endeavour to restrain myself. See that you do. Kramer jammed his hat on, paused at the threshold and muttered, For what it's worth, you were right. Again. Thank you, Inspector, Wolfe said. It's an exhausting habit. Kramer grunted something that might have been a laugh and departed, leaving behind a faint cigar haze that mingled pleasantly with the lingering aroma of duck. I went to the window, watching the red taillights fade into the city mist. That was almost friendly. Kramer, Wolfe said, is not my enemy, merely a man who insists upon wrestling the truth instead of inviting it to dinner. That's one way to put it. I turned back. You know, boss, you could have taken a bow today. The papers would have paid for a photo spread. Genius of gastronomy saves statecraft. He glared. Nonsense. A man does not boast about breathing. Still, I said, it's a nice kind of breathing, profitable too. He ignored that, signalling for the last ritual of the night. Fritz, beer. The door opened instantly, as though the command had been waiting in the air. Fritz entered with the tray, the beer foaming perfectly in the chilled glass, and placed it before him. Wolfe lifted it solemnly. Mr. Brenner, you have restored not only your honour, but the equilibrium of this household. Danke, Fritz said quietly. And you, Herr Wolfe, you restored mine. I leaned back, grinning. Touching, isn't it? If this keeps up, I'll have to call the Gazette again. Archie, Wolfe said, you will do no such thing. Fine, but admit it. Peace has returned. He looked around the room, the polished table, the steaming coffee cups, the faint golden light glancing off the walls. His shoulders eased, and for once the great detective looked content. Yes, he said finally. Peace. And butter. I stood, stretching. Well, that's civilization. West 35th Street's back to normal. Wolfe raised his glass. Civilization, Archie, is fragile. It requires vigilance, order, and a competent cook. Then we're safe, I said, because the butter's back. He gave a small, satisfied grunt. Indeed. I turned off the lights, leaving the room aglow with the last shimmer of comfort. Fritz's laughter drifted faintly from the kitchen, and Wolfe's glass clinked softly against the tray. And that was how peace returned to West 35th Street, on a plate, under sauce, served hot. Civilization, in short, was safe.